The 70 rails of 2025 have more or less been judged and reviewed. There's still a few stragglers to be picked up, but I mean, hopefully Darren can basically round those out and we'll basically finish it out for this year. I'll note that basically for this year, I basically broke my record for the amount of reviews. And I actually exceeded 100 reviews this time around, so hooray for personal achievements. I definitely feel I should be doing this much next year, but I'm happy I did at least once, I guess. Alright, so I'll note that basically for the 7-year-old challenge of 2025, there was basically 167 entries. And of these entries, 123 are basically claimed to be successful. This is a little bit more than last year in 2024, which basically had 160 entries and 112 successful reported entries. So compared to last year, a lot more successes and less incompletes. I'm not entirely sure that's basically the case basically for the stuff I reviewed, because it did actually feel like a lot of these successful entries were perhaps not belong to the genre compared to last year, but that could be biased. I'm not really sure, so who knows. And of course, I won't just basically completely ignore 2023, which basically had 203 free entries, but that was the COVID year, so yeah, there was issues happening that year. Much previously, 2024 and 2023, I basically gone through a post tally of the games basically reviewed. So yes, basically I had 107 entries right here, and these basically the scores basically had for them. So we had 19 ones for completeness and 15 first eggs, etc., etc., etc. And compared to last year, here's basically how it looks. So basically in the completeness category, I basically had a lot less freeze basically right here, as you can basically see. And I can actually just minimize this a little bit. So basically both on. And I basically had in the stacks here, a lot more ones and a little bit less freeze. Fun, I actually tried to take into practice what I basically said last year. So you'll see I actually have still a lot of ones, but a little bit less ones than last year, and a lot more twos. So, and a lot more freeze as well as, the throw out there as well. So basically, from the initial, viewing right here, basically, basically for a lot of these scorings basically have, they're basically a lot more ones and a lot less freeze. And I believe the only real exceptions here are basically in scope, which basically had it basically had a lot of ones, but compared to the amount of twos basically have in 2024, it's not that much of an increase, because there's a lot of twos here basically. Note by the way as well, innovative and rogue-likeness basically. Innovative basically had only 21 freeze basically here, and 20 in 24. Even though there's just a bigger number in this one, note that basically had almost 30 reviews. I did have 30 reviews, basically more than last year. So this number really should be a lot higher. So I basically did have a lot lower freeze for innovative as well. This is sort of throw it out there. And then for rogue-likeness basically over here, you'll note to basically have a much deeper spread. So there's 40 freeze. So again, that's a little bit less. But it's basically a higher spread, twos and ones. It's basically more balanced. Not exactly the greatest thing to basically see for a rogue competition, but it is what it is. Now, going over scores here, basically, I initially felt that I basically had everything being scored a lot less this year, and I think I basically held very much right to that sort of instinct here. Basically, I felt I had a lot more ones basically happening and a lot less freeze, so everything was basically a lot more down. The only real exception was basically fun, which basically, as I said, basically had a lot more twos, but even then, it really felt everything was basically a lot worse. So basically I had a lot more ones, minus the fun and scope, which basically did a little bit different, because I had a lot more fun scores going up this time around, and there's still a lot of twos basically for scope. So I kind of drawn on my head that maybe scope is a big issue this year, but maybe not really that much of one. I still like a lot less freezos, so a lot less standouts. Now, I will note that basically compared to like the last years, I'm very happy about how I basically reviewed and scored the games. Basically, in like 2023, I went over like how basically rate roguelikeness and stuff like that, and like 2024, I basically went over like what it's basically gonna change for fun. I'm not really gonna change a whole lot basically how basically do the scoring. Other than perhaps basically having like less reviews like next year in like 2026. I'm more or less happy, so good job to like the viewers and to like my fellow reviewers and like the developers and stuff like that. It went pretty well. Now, before I basically exit out of here, there is like one more thing to basically note. So send your rolls to 2025. Now, there's basically 167 entries here, and if I basically go to the calculator, I basically have like 107 of these like games basically reviewed, and I basically go like this, and like get my like thing here. Note that basically of like the games basically like complete this year, I basically reviewed like 64% or so of like them, and if you basically take into fact that basically like all these games basically are incomplete, so there's like only 123, so I basically reviewed like 87% of like the successful entries this time around. I did a lot of reviewing this year, and I guess I'll actually throw it out here. I actually felt like reviewing for this like this year is a little bit down compared to like last year. I felt like that basically like there was like initial like some like interesting people like doing reviews, but after like the first like 2 months, March and April, we're basically into May here, and like it's basically really like really dropped off quite a bit, and I'm basically doing a lot of reviews basically at this like endpoint. There's still like a few like reviews coming in from other people, but it really dropped off, I think. So we really do need like work on reviews. I will say though that basically I'm very happy with like the fact that basically like during Adopt Day, I did like every game getting 2 reviews though, because one of these games basically that I'll throw out here, Waterbows Roguewood. When we basically check out like the scoring for like Waterbows like Roguewood here, you're gonna note that basically the scoring are gonna be like wildly different for like all 3 judges that basically like reviewed this game. And it's basically going to show that like you really do want to basically have like multiple people like reviewing these games, like not doing like just like one review for a game, because it's very possible that like one of these like reviewers are basically like have like Roguewood, I think like a 1.33. So basically scoring of 1.33 raw score basically means like that like would be like eliminated for like reviewing for like our reviewers if like it's basically 23 or like below in like those years where like it's just one game per reviewer, if like it's like too low of a rank. At least like the amount of like people that basically reviewed it, like it got its proper share, so hooray for that. All right, well, at this point, there's not a whole lot more basically to say about like this year. I'll basically see you guys in 2026. So I'll basically keep like doing like the like reviews for like well the playthroughs basically for like, the rest of the games that you have to basically get to. But until we get to it, take care.